Alrighty, I'm super excited for today because we are sharing some experiment results. And so if you're, like me, an avid gardener, as spring rolls around, you start getting a little bit antsy, wanting to get things into the garden as early as possible. But how cold is too cold for transplanting our crops? That was the exact question that I wanted to answer with this experiment that we're going to go through today. And so leading into that experiment, the kind of knowledge that I had and the conversations that I had with really experienced gardeners was that for our cooler weather crops, like say broccoli and onions and kale, we're looking for an average nighttime low of 8 Celsius. And then for our warmer weather crops such as tomatoes and squashes, cucumbers, we're looking for an average nighttime low of 10 Celsius. The challenge though is that for me in Canada, that's fairly late into the spring, even in some instances into the summertime. And so because of that, I figured, hey, what would happen if I transplanted way earlier on than that? So on April 2nd, I decided to take a couple of my precious tomato babies and transplant them into the garden. I'd hardened them off and planted them in the exact same bed as where I grow my tomatoes all through the season. And then once popping them into the garden, I made sure to give them as much support as possible to try and keep them warm. So I put a couple inches of leaf mulch down to create a little bit more of a buffer or barrier between the cold air and their roots. Then I put black landscape fabric down on top of this to draw in as much heat from the sun on those sunny days as possible. And then lastly, I also put one of my DIY greenhouses over top of them to keep as much of that warm air right around them as possible. So it's now May 11th, about 6 weeks later from when I transplanted them. And what I want to do today is pop this mini DIY greenhouse off of them, take a look at them, and make 3 observations from what I've learned through this experiment. And so just before we start diving into those pieces, for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more calmness, more restoration in your life, then I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here, because we put out new videos just like this one every single week to be taking as much of that guesswork out of gardening as possible so that you can be tapping into and experiencing its mental health benefits. So let's get this greenhouse off and take a look at what we're working with. And as we can see here, I'm thrilled to share that they have survived, but at the same time, they are absolutely not thriving. They have not been happy with me whatsoever over the course of the last 6 weeks here. So the first observation that I want to make here is in regards to the leaf color. And as we see on these plants here, a lot of that lower growth has really yellowed away, even started to turn brown and black in some instances. So as you transplant your plants and you notice some discoloration on them, such as the lower leaves turning yellow on tomato plants, or potentially some purple hues in your cabbages or broccolis, that is an indicator that your plant is in survival mode and is trying to hold on for dear life, and you want to do something to try and warm up that environment for them, such as utilizing a DIY greenhouse. Now, the second observation that I make is so fascinating, and that is that over the course of April, these 2 plants here put on absolutely 0 growth. They were 100% stagnant, not putting out any new growth whatsoever. Only over the course of the last 7 days or so has the new growth started to come on and be nice and green. But to put that in perspective, 1 second. So this plant baby right here, way up above, it was started on the exact same day as these 2, but I've kept it inside underneath the grow lights for the entire time. And as we can see, it's put on about an additional foot of growth. The leaves are all nice and green, and it's even put out flowers and already set its first fruit. So for myself, this was actually like really liberating and freeing, because I kept on feeling like maybe I should transplant earlier, maybe I should transplant earlier. And now having done this experiment, I know that yes, I can transplant earlier than 10 Celsius for my warmer weather crops, but I'm not gaining anything. All that has happened with these plants that I transplanted earlier is that they've really struggled, and they've essentially lost a full month of growing by being out in the garden in unfavorable conditions. So now moving forward, I kind of have that peace of mind that, hey, if it's not nice and warm out yet, there's no rush to be getting things into the garden. Allow them just to continue to hang out inside underneath the grow lights, and they're going to end up being much happier and larger when they move into the garden. And the third key takeaway here is to run experiments. I think this is such a fun way to garden and to ultimately grow as a gardener as well. So right now I'm running an experiment where I'm comparing beets and carrots that I've transplanted versus direct sown. Another experiment where I'm playing around with zero hardening off process and just moving them directly outside. And the reason why I'm such a big fan of experiments is because it shifts all of the energy from expectations towards experiments and experience. So I think expectations are the great thief of joy because it sets the bar up here, and anything below that is then not deemed worthy or happy or anything along those lines. Versus experiments and experience, I now have this really incredible data point from this little tomato experiment that I ran that's going to allow me to apply that into subsequent seasons and get my tomatoes into the garden at the absolute best time. And so as you begin to compound all of those experiments, all of the learnings from it, all of the experience, what inevitably ends up happening is you grow as a gardener, and as a result of that, your bounty, your harvest, your yield begins to increase each season, just as it has been for me. I've taken this mindset since I started gardening back in 2016, and now the harvest and yields that I get are truly, truly incredible. So as you go into this gardening season, I really encourage you to try on that experimental mindset. Design a couple of experiments, see how it goes, and I'm confident that ultimately it's going to help you fall even further in love with your time in the garden. So folks, that's everything for today here. I hope this video has been valuable. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comments. I start every one of my days by answering every single question, so you're going to get a response from me super quickly. Other than that, I can't wait to catch you on the next video. Go get those hands dirty, and I'll see you soon.